Friday afternoon, August the 5th, 1983, and the work of the Sixth Assembly of the World Council of Churches grinds to a near halt as the staff of stewards joined their youth delegate colleagues in a dramatic show of force over the percentage of youth delegates on the new World Council of Churches Central Committee.
We, the young people of this assembly, wish to register our disapproval concerning the nominations for the Central Committee. We are not prepared to compromise over the 13.5% representation of young people on the Central Committee. Youth delegates will be again proposed for substitution of present names. We insist upon a favorable response by tomorrow afternoon, and should this not come, we will be forced to consider other ways of making our disapproval heard. Thank you.
In response, the council appointed a 6-member youth corps who will work over the next 7 years to give youth a greater voice in the International Church Forum. Barbara Wood is an Anglican, currently serving as youth worker at Vancouver's Ryerson United Church. She meets at the pressure point with Ivan Cumming to talk about what it means to be young in an uncertain world.
Hello, welcome to Pressure Point. My name is Ivan Cumming, and I'm filling in for Rod Booth, who is usually your host at this time. And I'm happy to introduce to you tonight my guest, Barbara Wood. Barbara is a youth minister at Ryerson United Church here in Vancouver, and I've known you, Barbara, as a member of the Anglican youth movement and in many other capacities. How does it feel to be on the staff at Ryerson United Church?
After a month, a very short and quick month, it feels fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of things to do at first, aren't there?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to do them all at once as well.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. What were some of your early experiences in church youth groups?
I remember going to confirmation class when I was, I guess, 11 or 12, and I didn't understand it at all. And all of a sudden I became an adult member of the church, and I thought that there was something wrong with me because I didn't mean anything to me at the time. Following that, someone invited me to become a part of a youth group at our church that was just forming, and I thought maybe that was something I could understand. And sure enough, I decided it was nothing wrong with me, there was something wrong with the church.
All right, we just keep on going from that. Yeah. This was in Kelowna.
This is in Kelowna where
Yes.
I grew up, yes. I was quite involved in the youth group there in leadership roles and in different capacities, and also worked in the Diocese of Kootenay around the Okanagan area and over into the Kootenays.
Right.
Training youth leaders and organizing youth events, things like that.
Right.
I came to Vancouver to go to university, and when I came here I began to be active at Christ Church Cathedral downtown Vancouver.
Right.
And there I worked in a young adults group with young adults, and also I helped in a youth ministry group there with youth.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And what were some of the things you got involved in outside of just the local church? Yeah.
Well, in the summer of 1980, I went to a National Anglican Youth Forum in Ontario, representing British Columbia Anglican Youth Movement.
Mm-hmm.
And at that forum, I was elected a national youth unit, and I was elected there to represent BC Yukon.
Mm-hmm.
And that began, I think, quite a big picture for me that has been getting bigger and bigger.
That's what I understand. Finally arriving at the youth core group of the World Council of Churches.
Yes. This is my rise to stardom at the age of 24. I don't know.
You haven't had a chance to take part in any of those meetings of the World Youth Core yet,
the group
have you?
was actually formed this summer at the Assembly, and the Central Committee meeting right following the Assembly ratified the people who were proposed for that group.
Right.
So the group has just been formed, and the first meeting is in Geneva in January.
I'd like to ask you some more about that. First, I'd like to ask about a group called Young Christians for Global Justice.
Hmm.
Now, that's quite a name, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? It was worse before.
Was it?
Yes, it was something about interdependence, but at any rate, it's a North American ecumenical youth organization of youth we classify from 17 to 30.
Right.
And this organization is U.S. Canadian, and is made up of member organizations, youth organizations, that have a commitment to or an interest in justice issues, as we're called to work at them from being a Christian.
It sounds fascinating. Does this group have conventions, conferences? Is it an educational group
It is.
by and large?
Most of its mandate is actually to look at our situation as North American young people in a
Right.
wider context, in a global context, to try and educate ourselves about that and how we can respond from our situation. And we have an annual event at which usually approximately 150 people come
Wow.
to, and we alternate between Canada and the United States. And at which time also a steering committee is elected, and I've been on the steering committee of that for 2 years.
Well, it seems like a long way from Kelowna to that
Yes.
gathering of young Christians for global justice. It sounds intriguing, actually. How does one make contact with that organization?
Our official office address is 600 Jarvis Street in Toronto, which is the Anglican Church
Oh,
head
yes,
office.
right.
We use that as a mailing address, although we don't have any staff people employed. Our budget is not quite that large yet.
Well, from there to the assembly this summer, I suspect that a great many people had their lives changed a lot by being part of that assembly. And I was there in a very small capacity, and I was quite moved by it. What all were you involved in at the assembly this summer?
I've been involved for over 2 years prior to the assembly, working on the youth pre-assembly, which was a gathering of all the youth who were involved at the assembly for 5 days before the assembly.
How many youth would that be?
It was approximately 300, which was about 125 youth delegates and about 175 stewards, which were youth from around the world who came to volunteer their time at the assembly and do sort of Joe jobs there.
Sure.
So all of us gathered prior to that for 5 days and looked at strategizing actually for youth participation at the assembly, looked at issues common to ourselves and to try and I guess form some sort of community or look at how we were a community if we were indeed.
5 days.
And we planned for that for about 2 years.
Well, it would take that long though, because people would be from all over the world.
Oh yes, and it was quite exciting to meet people from all over the world.
Yes.
There was a lot of Canadians there because Canada was the host country. There was about 40 actually stewards that were Canadian. And I think a lot of those Canadian young people got a shock of their lifetime to be in the midst of all of this and to be hearing lots of different stories and from people that they had never even imagined before. It was quite a time.
Well, if you planned for it for 2 years, then the event happened. Was it like you thought it was going to be, or?
I was in initially one of the program planning groups 2 years ago, at which time the program has been changed a number of times since then, because it goes through different development. So the program itself was not a surprise to me. I knew what was going to happen, but it wasn't as I originally envisioned it even 2 years ago, so it almost changed every day. And during the pre-assembly itself, it also changed as things needed to be.
Much tension?
Yes.
Was there?
North American young people who were there felt very distressed in the very first day of the pre-assembly. The stories they were hearing, the guilt they were feeling, the kind of pressures they felt under, and the inability to respond. That was a problem. A lot of people opted out of that, afraid to do anything or say anything. Some people got defensive, which always makes things worse. Some people just said, I don't know what to do, I feel so awful.
Yes.
So there was a lot of shock for some young people, and that was difficult. It was difficult to work through that because, again, in 5 days when things were packed quite full, there isn't time.
Not a lot of time, no.
And there was a lot of angry people there as well.
Was it worth doing?
Oh, yes. Even though there were tensions, the tensions are apart. I hope some of those people have taken those tensions home and begun to think more about what they need to be knowing and what they need to be doing as North American young people.
In what way was it worth doing? Like, what would you say happened to Barbara in that?
To me in that?
Yeah.
Well, I guess my position as a North American was something I was expecting mostly. I've had some international experience before, a conference a few years ago where I was quite blown away and I wasn't sure how to react. I think this time I was a bit more prepared for some of that. But for me personally, to see where North American youth are at this sort of group of 40 people who supposedly are involved and interested and want to be committed to something, who were really taken aback at the reality at which we were faced, to me that's a very demanding mandate for us to continue doing education and to work much harder at that with young people and about what our role is in North America.
These people would all be Christians?
Yes.
Yeah.
And very different backgrounds and
very
different beliefs.
Backgrounds. But I suppose, like young people anywhere, working at trying to find some kind of meaning in their life, trying to determine what specific call is there in being Christian at this particular time.
For some people, that call, I think, was much easier, not easier, much more immediate for them to define. People who live in countries where they're oppressed every day for either their beliefs or their part in society. For we as North Americans, that's a bit different. We have the luxury of thinking, where is our place in society and what should we be doing about it?
Right.
And there's a conflict there of people who have had to be faced with real life in a different way than we have. And there was some tension between that. But
how did that affect you, or in what way was your faith, or what was your faith altered by that?
Certainly a deepening of commitment to the path that I think I've begun to follow, looking at what are called the justices as Christians. And a great deepening of that through experience with people and listening to people talk about their own experiences at home and some of the commitment that they have and how they're bearing that out in their lives. To me, that was something that, again, resonated with my own beliefs that I'm following, but also deepened that and challenged that. Certainly, I didn't take it all easily. I was certainly taken back sometimes and not sure about what to do next or what even to say to some people. I was challenged a lot.
Well, who were some of the people? Who would be some of the people who influenced you most during that? Is that a fair question to ask at this point?
Oh yes, I think so. There's people that stand out. A fellow from Namibia, a young man from Namibia, who gave us a presentation on his country, and unable to speak English very well, he tried to give it in English to us because obviously we didn't understand him. And his very, very moving account of some of the church and some of the work of Christians in that country and the struggle for people for liberation there against such an oppressive force. A man from Suriname, a young man from Suriname, who was concerned about going back home, facing persecution when he got back home. And he told us that. And the day before things were over at the assembly, he phoned home to find out where things were at in his country and that all the lines had been cut off. So he wasn't sure if he could go home or not. Things like that are so immediate, all of a sudden you're talking to these people who are dealing with that. A lot of people from the Middle East, and a woman from Syria who's just said, I can't tell you anything, I don't want to talk. She said, we're the bad guys and I can't, and she was very afraid to even express herself personally. People from Beirut who said, get out of our country, we don't want anybody there, leave us alone. These things that you see on news every night, and here are these people telling you about their real life in the midst of all of that.
So that's hard to absorb, all that. You know, it's hard to imagine what it would be like to be in connection with people who are in that kind of oppression or that kind of, where the faith makes that many demands on them.
Exactly. And usually in most sort of casual instances is that relationship or communication able to happen, like sitting down over lunch or working at a task together. It was when we were in the large meeting settings where tensions really began to rise because regions would be sitting together, and that sort of, divided us from one another, and people would make statements that incriminated other people, and it was difficult not to feel personal guilt in, hearing about North America or whatever.
I understand that some differences arose around the issue of the possibility of having a fast day.
Oh dear.
To do this as a kind of a representational act.
Yes. The North American group at the first meeting, as I was telling you, felt some guilt and wasn't sure how to respond, get out of that and respond in some helpful way to what people had been saying. So someone came up with the idea that we would have a prayer vigil and try and give ourselves over to what was happening and try and understand somewhat of what God was saying to us through these people, and give ourselves a time of peace and quiet where we could reflect on that and hopefully move from there. And have that be assigned to some of the other participants that we were trying, and the only way we knew how, really, at the moment, the only tools we had with us. This was supposed, because of the time didn't allow any other time, we decided to have it over lunch hour. And the person who actually stood up to make the announcement said that it would be a fast. It was not our intention as a North American group to do that. I was horrified when she stood up to speak. I almost wanted to run up and say, no. And immediately, of course, the ramifications of that. The Bible study that morning had been this from Isaiah, I believe it is, where the kind of fast I want is this, to free the yoke of oppression and let my people go. So it was a bad mistake, and we were unable to recover from that very well, unfortunately. There was lack of communication. And we went ahead with our prayer vigil, but it was difficult.
Well, it probably demonstrates how easy it is for us to assume that we can do something for those people in that situation.
Yes.
We assume that, and
Yes.
then feel some sense of frustration that we
Yes.
don't know what is the right thing to do. Every once in a while, I just get a notion that being made in the image of God must be that we begin to sense some of God's problems. And maybe learn that it isn't easy to be God. And it's lucky the job isn't open.
That's right. None of us could fill it.
That's right. It's very fortunate that the job is filled, and they don't need another God. We already got one of those. We don't have to imagine how to work with other people. We have to really imagine how to listen to them, though.
Yes. Yes.
And how to get some sense of what their world really feels like.
Yes. I think it was really a two-way street that should have happened and didn't quite make it. I think the North American people really should have been more open to listening, and people from other parts, I think, could have been more open to having us respond to them.
Sure, yeah.
And that there wasn't much of an opportunity for that. Individuals certainly, but again, as larger groups.
And for 5 days, 5 days is not a long time to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. What are your hopes about particularly about the youth core group with World Council? What are some of the hopes that you have for that?
I guess some of my hopes are to look at the pre-assembly, the youth pre-assembly, and the assembly, and to look at some of the mistakes that were made or the things that didn't quite click with people,
Right.
and to try and work at those kind of relationships that are so important. We're talking about an age group of people from 17 to 30 who obviously will be the people in some kind of decision-making framework within the next few years. I think if we can learn at this time how we might be able to understand each other and begin to respond with each other, that there's some hope for the future. Now, that to me is important.
Right. How big a group is this?
It's a group of 6 people.
6 people. From?
There's a woman from Jamaica. There's a woman from Madagascar. There's a man from Southeast Asia. I'm not sure exactly where he's from. There's a man from West Germany, and there's someone from South America. One other person, I'm not sure.
It sounds like an international peace mission all of itself, doesn't it?
Well, I hope so.
Yes.
I hope so. It will be a difficult, I think, time to work, but I think that working together, well, I hope that something comes of it.
And will you meet once a year?
Once a year, yes.
Yes. And
For
for
the
how-
next 7 years.
Yeah. Do you feel some sense of call and fulfillment in that?
Yeah. I feel a sense of call in my life, and I try and follow that. Things open up for me, and I seem to be led into places where I'm meant to be. And sometimes that doesn't even feel obvious or intentional on my part. I try and go at things one day at a time, responding to the call that I feel from God. And it seems to be bringing me into places that are just quite amazing. So I feel like I'm fitting in.
What are the kind of essential faith commitments that are important to you and might therefore be important to somebody else? Me.
I think that God sent to us a message very clearly in the life of Jesus Christ. And I think that if we take seriously that the kingdom of God is with us and within us, that we have to look at what kind of message that Jesus Christ did bring to us and try and bear that out in society today, for it's still very relevant in my mind. And that message, I think, the two greatest thing is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. If we really followed those commandments or looked at those seriously and took them seriously in everything that we did, there wouldn't be the problems in the world there are today.
Right.
Now, that may seem very ideal, but...
Well, yes, but there's nothing wrong with being ideal.
No, you're right.
The question that is in that is, a lot of people would say that. How does one go about kind of assimilating that hope? How does one go about having that message of Jesus Christ make a difference? What have been some of the key things in your life that have allowed you to assimilate that?
People have been key, and I think that we find God in each other. And I think that we're enabled by each other and empowered by each other to go out there and to continue. I don't think we can ever do anything alone. And we have to remember our dependence on each other and our need for each other. So I can name some key people in my faith development, and certainly some people who, for me, are signs of hope in the world today.
Who are some of those people?
The signs of hope today in this
Yeah,
world?
yeah.
Well, like people at the assembly, for instance.
Yes.
A woman from Bolivia, Damatilia de Jongara, who for me was I spoke with her for about an hour one day and had a wonderful conversation with her and about her commitment to continue in a situation, again, very different than mine, but one where hope is borne out.
Right.
People in the most oppressive situations find that hope and that faith within themselves. And to me, that's a sign that there's a possibility of us working together and perhaps changing the way things are. People willing to give up their lives, Oscar Romero, people like that.
Oh, yes. All right. So that your contact with them allowed you to assimilate within your own being some of the same kind of faith and hope that they carry. We've come quite a long way from communicants class through Heineken young peoples, through such things as the young Christians for Global Justice. And did you work with the Alcohol Research Council? No, with
I worked with Counterattack.
Counterattack. Yes, you did, didn't you? Yeah.
I worked for 2 years in a department of ICBC actually called Traffic Safety Information Education. And I worked with high school students. I was director of student services.
Wow.
And most of that was information education on counterattack, drinking and driving with young people.
So you'd get a chance to see high school from a different point of view then, wouldn't you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
Living and working with youth
Yeah.
in our own setting, I'm wondering if from your experience and from your thinking, what clues you might have for people who want to work with youth. Particularly, there are people in congregations or in community groups who really genuinely want to provide a setting that is supportive and enriching for youth, and would like to somehow relieve some of the cross currents of pressure that they're experiencing. If do you have any clues? I'm not asking for a blueprint because I know
there isn't one.
That's right. You can't give all the exact details, but what are some of the clues that people need to be aware of in our day about working with youth?
I think that we do ministry with each other, and that includes youth. We do ministry with youth, not to them or for them. And I think that includes making youth feel a part of, because they are a part of the church. That includes being an open kind of forum or community for them to be a part of. And that can be manifested in many different ways. I think youth groups are very common in churches to have youth get together and feel a part of that group. I think it has to go beyond that, whether you have a youth group or not. You need to look at youth being integral in the rest of the church setting, being a part of the church family, to be an open and supportive kind of place where youth will feel accepted. And I don't mean that in kind of a laissez-faire way where everyone can do anything they want, but where they can be accepted for who they are and they can be supported in growing and struggling with who they are and be enabled in that in order to go back out into the so-called real world.
Some awareness of their wisdom as well as the issues
yes,
that
their
they're
gifts.
working at.
Yes, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Would you make any comment about the particular kinds of setting in which youth are today that needs to be addressed? Is there? It's hard to make general statements about that.
I think there's one general statement that you can make today, and that is that youth in our society today are in a most, I think, unique position in that I think that they're the most frightened group of people ever in our society.
Well,
youth that you talk to in almost any setting today will give various aspects of that, apathy, hopelessness, discouragement, acting out in different ways. But I think that fear is the basis of that.
that's interesting because that's not the kind of emotional state that you usually associate with the carefree days of youth, if there ever were such things.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes. Well, I graduated from high school just a few years ago, really. And the difference from when I was in high school in the late 70s compared to what high school is like now, it's two different worlds.
Well,
I thought I could walk into a high school today and feel like a part of things and be able to almost talk the same language. It's just not the case. People are feeling hopeless about their future. They're not sure they'll make it to 30. They don't think it matters whether they go to university or not because they may not live that long, and even if they do, will there be a job for them? There's lots of fear in the future and just an unsureness about what life is really all about. And that, to me, is one of the saddest things on earth today.
yeah. We're getting close to the end of our time, and I'd like to ask about the International Year of the Youth. Who has made that declaration?
The United Nations.
United Nations. And when is it?
It's in 1985.
Well, and are we doing any preparation for it? Are you doing any?
Well, yes, I am involved in some preparation for it. The Canadian government has taken some steps recently, the Secretary of State, to provide some funding and so hopefully some government programs for what's called IYY 85.
IYY 85.
That's right.
Sounds like a school yell.
Yeah, there's an ecumenical youth coalition in the Lower Mainland here who are working on some plans for 1985.
Well, what might come of it? I mean, what's your feeling about having a year set aside for it?
Well, the theme of it is peace, participation, and development.
Peace, participation, and development.
Yes.
Oh,
Now, those three words, although they may not seem to go together at first, I think will hopefully set a direction for some very positive things to be happening. For a year to be focused on youth, I'm hoping that it will be a year that youth will pick up on and broaden their horizons here in North America particularly. Look at some of the issues that we're talking about, peace, development, obviously two justice-related issues.
So it isn't so much perhaps focusing on youth themselves as giving youth something to focus on.
That's what my hope would be, and
right.
that's certainly what we will be focusing on. Again, ministry with people, not to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are other countries or other organizations more actively involved in it than we are? Or
The United States, in its own way, has been working on this for 3 years now, leading up to it. So when you hear that kind of organization and the money that's being put into that, you're always felt like a bit like the country cousin north of them. However,
don't we though? I think maybe they're going to put some youth on the moon or something.
Oh, who knows? But there's plans on the Young Christians for Global Justice, North American Ecumenical Youth Group, to be working on that, and the World Council of Churches Youth Subunit.
And do you have any imagining about any events that might be focusing on 1985?
Hopefully most of the events will be regional events that people will be able to learn more about their own region and some of what that means in a wider context. But there will also be, I think, probably work camps in different situations that people can go to, exchange programs, hopefully, those kinds of things. Might
there be some Native Indian, white, and urban and rural interaction in all of this? When
we met a couple of weeks ago to discuss this at the Lower Mainland group and what some of our hopes were, and certainly those kind of issues which are very prevalent for us in our context here, we hope to be dealing with. One of the ones that we're very interested in is the Pacific Rim issue. Canada, BC in particular, being a Pacific Rim part of the world, looking at some of the issues that are involved there.
We'll look forward to 1985.
Yes.
To the International Year of the Youth.
Of the Youth, yes.
And some of the projects that might be involved in that.
It will be exciting, I hope.
Good. Barbara, thank you for being with us. And thank you, folks, for being part of our Pressure Point series. My name is Ivan Cumming, and I'm signing off and hope that you've enjoyed this program as much as I've enjoyed being on it.
Pressure Point is a production of Interchurch Television, a cooperative venture of Anglican, United, Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, Lutheran, and Baptist churches in the Vancouver Lower Mainland. We welcome your comments and your inquiries concerning the program. You may contact us at 1955 West 4th Avenue, Vancouver, V6J 1M7, or call us at 738-1133.